All right, what is up, everybody? This is Alex once again with my next installment in my DC Animated Universe movie review extravaganza. We've already done Superman Doomsday, and we're moving right along to its not direct sequel, but its following movie, Justice League: The New Frontier. Came out in 2008 and saw the return of Bruce Timm and his team, along with Andrea Romano finally stepping into the movie universe to start doing all the voice direction, and she kills it here. We'll get to those voice actors here in just a moment. But a little bit of backstory into what this movie is actually about here first. Upon a second viewing, of course, I had to do a bit of back research and to kind of get a better understanding of what made this movie so great when it was released. It got stellar reviews upon its original release. So I wanted to see kind of if I could get a better idea of what made it so great. And one of the first things I had discovered was that this is actually based on a limited comic series that was called Justice League: The New Frontier. It came back out in 2004 and was set from 1953 to 1960, sort of that post-World War II and Cold War era, where they could kind of put these characters, Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, the Justice League, into these terrible crises that kind of that shook the world back then. So it's an interesting vantage point to see what would happen if Superman was there during the Cold War. How might that have affected the outcome, things like that. So already this movie has got a really solid tone and atmosphere to play in, and I think that's really exciting to see. Like I said, what happens when the Justice League can show up, and have an impact on on a global scale, on global politics, global crisis and things like that. So it's already really exciting, and to say it was executed well is kind of an understatement, because while there isn't a whole lot of really deep subtext, there are moments in this movie that come through and you really do get the feeling that the tension between the American government and the world at large in this case has really strained with Superman and his team. And so him and Wonder Woman have signed loyalty contracts to the American government to kind of become agents. Batman's gone completely underground, and just the relationship is broken essentially. And this movie is about how they come back together. And while it's the usual, we can do it, as a team, we have to work together and put our differences aside, which is very simple, but a very effective message. It really drives the point home, and I think it executes that really well. So this movie already has a great tone and a great atmosphere, like I already said. And helping with that is the excellent voice direction by Andrea Romano. And I'm just going to run some of these names down really quickly just to give you guys an idea of what we're dealing with here. David Boreanaz as Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern. Fantastic. The guy's charm comes through with just this magnetic charisma in every one of his scenes. Absolutely fantastic. We have Lucy freaking Lawless on board as Wonder Woman. I don't know why was this not thought of up until now? And this is going to kill me here for just a second. Why has she not been cast as a live-action Wonder Woman yet? Ben Affleck is pushing 50, and he's Batman. Henry Cavill, I think he's somewhere in his mid-40s. He's Superman, for crying out loud. Lucy Lawless, she's 49 years old and still looks awesome. She could be Wonder Woman. Hollywood, get your shit together. That's all I'm going to say about that. She's awesome in this movie. Her and Superman, played by Kyle MacLachlan, have some really great dialogue in the beginning of the movie about what's right and what's wrong when it comes to justice and freedom, and who should bear that responsibility. There's a great scene where they're in an internment camp where she's set free some Korean prisoners, and Superman's berating her for her actions. She's like, no, I gave these people a chance and a choice, and that's what's right. And there's this great tension, and it goes back to, again, that how can the world trust these heroes when they can just come in and sort of enact their own version of justice. And that's a really cool framing device about to show what's going on in the world at this point. So excellent people there. Neil Patrick Harris is on hand as the Flash. Again, why hasn't this been done of before? We will see the return of Patrick Harris as Nightwing in Batman Under the Red Hood, but in this, he's a great Wally West. He's fantastic. We have Arnold Taylor on hand as Captain Cold, who interacts with the Flash in the very beginning of this movie. And if you don't know that name, you know his voice. Because if you're like me and a fan of Final Fantasy, you've probably played 10, and he's the voice of Titus. So he's the man responsible for the delivery, of which I'll never do that again. So there's that. Just random bits of fun information there. Kira Sedgwick is on hand as Lois Lane. Brooke Shields, Carol Ferris, also great picks for this. Batman is being played by Jeremy Sisto, and damn. He does something, I think, quite unique with the approach to the voice here, because we don't get to see Batman without the cowl. We don't see Bruce Wayne in this. So we get to see him, I hesitate to call it alien, but it's incredibly menacing and somewhat otherworldly in his voice. There's a great interaction between him and John Johns, the Martian Manhunter, in which they have saved a boy from being murdered by this cult that's sort of the central antagonist of the movie. And John Jones has come back to his apartment, and Batman's kind of hiding in the corner, and they have this back and forth dialogue, and Batman simply leaves saying, I have a $70,000 rock to stop the man from Metropolis, but all I need is a penny for a book of matches to stop you. And John Jones, who the Martian Manhunter being weak to fire, just slumps on the floor, and there's just, like I said, there's this menacing dark energy coming from Sisto as Batman, and it really comes through, and I think it's a really cool way to play the character, again, because we don't see that Bruce Wayne, you don't see the duality, you just see sort of this enigmatic figure that is Batman in this movie. And of course he's I would say he's a very much an unknown quantity in the world at this point, at least within the universe here, so getting that sort of alien nature to him is very, very cool. Alright, who else is on board here? Somebody I just have to mention, because this kind of struck me as funny. There's one scene with Robin in this movie. It might be a Tim Drake, it might be Dick Grayson. I don't know which Robin it is, but he's literally here for like 30 seconds. And he's voiced by Shane Habucha, and me being the completionist and having to know every single thing about what's going on in this movie and who people are, I of course did research into these people's voices, and it turns out that he was in the Stacy's Mom video, that Fountain of Wayne crap fest from 2003, Grammy nominated video and song. Yeah, so there's that. Moving on. So, needless to say, there's a lot of really great voice talent going into this production, and it really, really sells it. I know I've said it before, when you've got voices that can embody the character, even if you might have grown up with the Kevin Conroys and the Tim Dalys, blanking all of a sudden, Susan Eisenberg, who I think is a fantastic voice actress for Wonder Woman back in the Justice League cartoons, who embody these characters really well. You can bring in new talent to infuse something so new and maybe raw is the way to describe it, to give these characters a new life, a new take. So I love Andrea Romano when she does her voice work thing. She's absolutely absolutely fantastic when it comes to the DC voice acting that she does. So, what is this movie actually about? To say this movie is a bit of a disjointed mess is a bit is a bit too nice, I think, because the plot is a little goofy. We start off seeing Hal Jordan and his wingman Kyle Ace Morgan, who I believe is a superhero in one way or another. I could be wrong. They're flying at the end of the Korean War. They get shot down, but they survive. We see John Jones, the survivor of the Martian race, has teleported to Earth and takes on the form of a scientist who reached out to Mars to try and make contact. We then flash to Las Vegas, where Iris West is there on hand, and she's talking to Barry Allen, the Flash. He shows up when Captain Cold attacks the casino that they're at, and yeah, already there's a lot of threads going here. It's kind of hard to find the main protagonist of in this movie. If I had to say it's anybody, though, I would say that it is Hal Jordan. It's kind of his story and him kind of coming to terms with, being a hero again, and him ultimately becoming the Green Lantern. So we see a bit of a flash forward. John Jones is now a detective in Gotham City. He's investigating this doomsday cult, the Center, which has already been kind of hinted at already at the beginning of the movie. He teams with Batman briefly, and they save the little boy from being executed by the cult. And then we get to see Hal Jordan meet up with Carol Ferris and be taken to Ferris Air. They encounter King Faraday, who's going to help them, make him a pilot again. And it's, like I said, this is getting a little disjointed already. We see the Flash get to fight against Gorilla Grodd, who turns out to be a robot, and he's almost kidnapped by the American government because they're like, we got to figure out what makes this guy go fast. And then Hal Jordan almost gets into space, but it turns out that there are weapons of mass destruction on the spacecraft they're on, and Faraday's whole point is, well, if we get to Mars and they're evil, we have to blow them up. And Hal Jordan's like, no, we can't do that. So they get rescued, and that kind of leads us up to the big major conflict. All of these characters are kind of being drawn together in one way or another. We see finally the Center appears. It's this giant floating dinosaur spewing. I wish I was kidding about that, but I'm kind of glad that I'm not. Dinosaur spewing island that attacks Paradise Island, where Wonder Woman is training. And we don't see the fight there, but we find out that it was pretty bad, and forces Wonder Woman to flee in her invisible jet. Yeah, invisible jet, kids, invisible jet. Flies to an Air Force base where she meets up with all the other heroes. In the meantime, Hal Jordan has received the ring of willpower from Abin Sur, who kind of tells him, hey, you're the Green Lantern, and just when the time is ready, you'll need to use the ring. And then we get to see them all team up on the island. Superman flies out and does some recon and gets blasted. I think he's dead, and they take his example to kind of come together and be a team. And they go out and they attack the Center with Hal Jordan finally activating the Green Lantern ring and using it to escape from inside the monster that he's kind of flown his spaceship into to try and blow it up. Ray Palmer, the Atom, shows up on the scene with his little shrinking device, in which the Flash takes it, puts it on his back, and runs around the entirety of the Center to shrink it down. And then Hal Jordan flings it into space, and it blows up. And then Superman is found in the arms of Aquaman, who comes out of nowhere and is like, hey, I'm Arthur of Atlantis, and here's your hero. It is kind of bizarre in just how many little plot threads are going on here. And I don't know how well the story of this movie and the plot follows the plot of the comic series. But I imagine if they were able to maybe break this down into a couple of smaller releases, maybe break it into like 3 or 4 movies, we might have gotten a much better picture at the characters and what they were doing and this whole story, because it's a big story. Seeing these characters come together for, I guess, would be the second time now that the Justice Society has fallen, as it's hinted at in the beginning of the film. Getting to see them come back together and fight as a unit again, and show the world that they can be trusted and that they are a force for good, and we can move on forward into this bright new frontier, which incidentally is framed by the John F. Kennedy speech at the end of the movie, talking about how we have to move forward into this new frontier and work together as one. So it's all very positive and all that good stuff. So that's the plot of the movie, and it's okay if you didn't follow that. There's all those meandering plot threads. It all comes together nicely, and it's a pretty good story, I have to admit. So let's talk about the things that I like in this movie. First off, you cannot deny the fact that this movie is gorgeous to look at. It so faithfully recreates the style from the comic book that was written and drawn by Darwin Cook. Lots of very blocky fingers and sharp angular jaws, and everything's just kind of blocky. It feels very much like, if you guys remember watching Samurai Jack, and the series has returned recently, of course, as well, where there aren't a lot of black outlines to break up where one character or object meets against another one, so that kind of gives it this very kind of vibrant detailing to it. Obviously, there are some more detailed shots, and the characters are obviously drawn very, very well, I think. But it has an art style of its own that feels like if you took the Batman and Superman cartoons from the 90s and maybe dialed them back to the 50s, which is when this series and this film takes place, and you took the art styles from back then, which were, you know, from animation standpoints, were fairly primitive. It's what you would have gotten. So not only does this movie match the time period that it's being set in, but via its tone and atmosphere, the art style is also very evocative of that. I don't know if we took maybe the art style from the newer films like Justice League Doom or Teen Titans The Judas Contract, if we had taken that art style and that amount of detail and thrown it into this movie, if it would have worked as well. I don't know, and I'm going to lean towards it not working as well, because the art style really lends itself to the world that it is, because the technology we also see is very much of the time. The aircraft that Hal Jordan and his team are flying around in is very much of the time. You know, we get to see Batman's his Batcave, and he's looking at, you know, newspaper clippings through one of those old, you know, little spinny wheel machines, and so it's very, not, I won't say archaic, but it's very old school in its presentation, and it works so well in that regard. So it's absolutely gorgeous. All the other little, you know, shout outs and cameos, you know, during the final fight scene, of course, you know, Ray Palmer shows up. If you don't know who that is, if you've watched, you know, Legends of Tomorrow, Justice League, you know that's the Atom, but, you know, just the names they drop are just, you know, really, really cool things to see. The Green Arrow shows up. The Blackhawks show up, who they're a World War II unit of pilots that sort of, you know, weren't either the Axis or the Allies. They just sort of fought for the common good. They're in this. Adam Strange shows up in this. You know, he's the jetpack guy with the little fin on his head with the laser guns. It is literally everybody's on hand to help in this movie, for better or for worse. But that's what kind of makes it great, because there are so many fun characters we get to see in this movie. And of course, you know, that kind of leads to all those meandering plot threads where there's so much going on that it really kind of detracts from the overall narrative, but it all just coalesces very well towards the end. And that's really where my biggest critique of this movie comes down, is just how bloated everything feels. As I previously mentioned, I think it would have been a lot better to function as maybe a movie series, 3 or 4 movies. It would maybe come down to about an hour piece. This one's about 75 minutes long. But if you maybe just cut down the movie just a little bit and space things out, you can explore, you know, what was John Jones doing on Earth, you know, when he first got here and he became a detective in Gotham and was sort of investigating this cult. What was Hal Jordan doing up at, you know, during the Korean War? We do get to see bits of that, and, you know, what happened afterwards while he was at the VA hospital, and, you know, maybe some more time with him at Ferris Air. But we do get to see that, though. We do finally get a proper Green Lantern origin film in this series, you know, within a couple of years from now, production-wise, I should say. So we do get to see these things eventually, but the plot just feels really bloated, unfortunately, and it kind of detracts from the overall narrative up until, like I said, those last 30 minutes where it's all hell literally is breaking loose. There are dinosaurs attacking the island or the beachfront that they're on. You've got the military showing up. You've got Batman cruising around in the proto Batwing. You have the Green Arrow in his aeroplane. I know he has a plane in the old comic series, but it's just hysterical to see him flying around in this thing. You get to see all the characters kind of, you know, just come together and fight. It feels, you know, like Justice League did a lot of really fun battles like this, where the whole team comes together, and it's really cool to see a team like this fight on just a massive scale like they do in this movie, and seeing all these little, you know, cameo characters like I mentioned, you know, Adam Strange, Green Arrow, the Warhawks, you know, just like little nods to, you know, comic history, which is really cool. I think that's great for, you know, older fans who might not get things. There's those little funny elements of, you know, the way things were back then. There's a great scene where John Jones is sitting in front of a television set, and he's mimicking, because he's a shapeshifter, obviously, mimicking what he sees on TV. He turns into Bugs Bunny, and then turns into the Indian that would be shown at the end of the broadcast day, back in the 50s. And I can imagine there's going to be kids out there who are just thinking, what do they mean end of the broadcast day? Didn't TV just go on forever like it does today? Like, it's just funny how well framed this movie is within the time frame that it is in. It's such a product of, the time that they're setting in, and it's absolutely fantastic in that regard. So, plot aside, which obviously very goofy, could have been a little bit stretched out, I think, this movie's great. Getting to see what would happen if the characters had shown up during this time period, which I think they could have dug into a little bit more. Like I mentioned, the scene with Superman and Wonder Woman at the internment camp is really good for sort of setting this picture of, who's right and who's wrong, who has the authority to decide what is just. I think is a really great way to frame this universe. And honestly, I would love to see more stories set in this New Frontier universe, because it is a really exciting time, in history, where the world was changing at such a rapid pace that what happens if, Superman shows up and, is maybe, and if we go maybe to present time, and if Superman shows up and the Berlin Wall and the fall of the Berlin Wall, what happens then? What would have Wonder Woman been like if she had shown up, in the 70s and kind of seen, the women empowerment movement and all that? What do these characters do when they are faced with the time that, many of us are not so familiar with, because we just weren't alive back then? How do these characters react when they are faced with the reality of, back then? I think that'd be a really cool framing device for a lot of these characters, and it would really tell a great story, other than just, well, Superman has to go punch this thing now, or we have to go blow up this monster thing. Let's let these characters explore their ideals and how they mesh with society from the standpoint of the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and so on and so forth. I think it's a really cool idea, and I wish more superheroes got a chance to interact with the time that might be presented to them, instead of just whatever setting they're put in now, which obviously is current day. So it's a really good movie. I don't give these things grades, but it's a really solid, fun movie that paints a really different picture of what the world might have looked like had the superheroes been here. The closing, before the credits, there's this great closing monologue which uses the John F. Kennedy speech, New Frontier, and we get to see what the future held for them, and it borrows a lot from actual DC comic storylines. We get to see the Teen Titans show up. We see the Justice League fighting Starro, the big starfish monster. We get to see some villains, and then finally deciding to create the Justice League of America. So we get to kind of see what might have happened. I just wish we got to see what actually happened. Let's explore those. Like I said, I want to see what happens to this New Frontier storyline. I think, and I you can go and check out the full collected edition of the comics, and I'm going to try and find them myself and find out, how well does this mesh up with that storyline, and does it go deeper into that time frame? I think it'd be a really cool thing to see. So that's my thoughts on New Frontier. I like it. Did you like it? What did you think of the setting? Did you, obviously the voice actors are always a favorite part of these films for me. So did you like the voice actors that were on hand? What do you think of Lucy Lawless as Wonder Woman? Should she be Wonder Woman? I think she should be, to be completely honest. So yeah, there is all of that. Now, of course, we'll be getting on to our next one, and I'm so excited. Because if anybody knows me, I am a superhero fan second, and a Batman fan first. And the next movie that we're going to be touching on is Batman Gotham Knights. And I'm super excited to watch it again. Oh, man. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Definitely don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. As I've mentioned before, I'm going to be doing the entirety of the DC animated universe, going all the way from Justice League, or Superman Doomsday, to Teen Titans: The Judas Contract. Eventually, I hope to get some of the old Batman ones, Mystery of the Phantasm, Return of the Joker. I hope to get to a lot of these because these are the movies that sort of shaped my childhood and the characters that shaped my childhood and kind of made me the nerd that I am today. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this sort of, this look back at my thoughts on them so far. That's what we thought about the movie. I'll see you guys next time with Batman Gotham Knight.